So I just want to talk about the breakage and coalitions here that I find most interesting in analyzing what just happened. So we did call this out as soon as the shutdown became clear, late September. We said this is going to go into effect. Um, the Republicans had the upper hand because possession's 9/10 of the law. They have the majority in the House, Senate, and they hold the White House. So what we saw as the most likely, since there wasn't that much really to negotiate on, and there wasn't a position of strength for the Democrats, we said, we can go back and look at the tape here. We said there was going likely to be a breakage in the Democrats' minority coalition, and that's exactly what happened. You saw 8 Democrats who we boxed in green flip from the nay camp to the yays to get this thing the 60 votes it needed to achieve the supermajority and break through the filibuster process. Um, you also didn't have to see the Republicans pull out the nuclear option, which is ending the supermajority rules. Eventually, as this divide gets wider and wider between these two factions, power factions, and they can't agree with each other and achieve consensus, eventually this supermajority, like the forecast is it's going to disappear. I think in this process, though, you don't want to be seen as the party who did it because that's kind of you'll always be pointed to as the side who eliminated this thing and is operating in kind of bad faith, pulling back the filibuster rules to give the minority opposition a little bit more strength when they're out of office or out of power. So 8 flipped, 8 Greens, 8 Democrats flipped yes. That kind of suggests to me there really is nothing holding together this minority coalition. At best, it's a weak coalition. It needs to regroup and firm itself up heading into 2026, which is kind of the underlying dynamic you're seeing on election day results with, the Mamdani type of wing of the party, spearheaded by the New York City mayor election victory. Um, Seems like the path that the new Democratic Party is heading into 2026. We'll see if it resonates with voters. I am skeptical, but kind of the same way that the Republican Party underwent its metamorphosis in between 2014 and 2016. You can say before that even too with the Tea Party.
Yep.
Yeah, I'd say like who was Boehner's whip who lost his seat? I want to say Virginia congressman. He actually lost and got primaried. That was your sign, in my opinion. It'll come to me probably after we're done recording. I think that was the 2014 midterms where that one happened. That was your sign that the Republican Party was going through its metamorphosis. It really completed itself when they allowed an outsider in Donald Trump to win their nomination in 2016. I think the Democratic Party has been fighting against that transition. The incumbents have been holding on to power. Pelosi, Schumer, et cetera, so representing that last wave of old guard. But Father Time is undefeated. You eventually age out, and I think that same process that we saw in the Republican Party in the mid 2010s, well, the Democratic Party is now going through that. So we saw eight Democrats flip toward yays. You even saw the loosest members of the Republican coalition. I call them Susan Collins from Maine, Lisa Murkowski. Even they flipped to yays. The one who didn't, right? If you go to the nays, one of these things is not like the other. Mr. Rand Paul, Senator Rand Paul. So you have to really question what is going on here? Why is Rand Paul so opposed to this? And part of it is this idea that you're going to defeat this process we're going through, like the deficits, right? You stand behind this foothold that you're occupying. You say like, not one and no more deficit spending, et cetera. That's not how the situation is ever going to be resolved, in my opinion. Like Yeah, you're like the tank man standing in front of the tank at Tiananmen Square. This episode won't be aired in China anyway, so we'll just talk about that. That'll get us blacklisted, but that's not going to be the path that actually shifts this system out of changed, which I think ultimately everybody wants. Um, but like the nays, I researched this week. Why is Rand Paul here in with the nays still? Um, and you get into his number one talking point was um, the hemp industry provisions, right? So there was this provision inside of HR 5371, which is the continuing resolution to end the government shutdown. There's language in there which I think they actually got Mitch McConnell to put in. So this becomes a hot button issue in Kentucky, right? You have their two senators on opposite sides of this one. But inside of HR 5371, um, you've got language that would ban the sale of hemp derived THC products. Which so if you think about this, I know no one tracks this fully, and as I dove deep into this, I was like, well, what is going on here? Um, You've got the United States cannabis industry. We'll talk about why this is so, it's actually a bigger deal than you think. You kind of split it into the white market, the gray market, and the black market. What do we mean by a white market? It is government sanctioned, regulated, and taxed, right? So once something in terms of like the economy becomes taxed, it's part of the government structure, right? Taxes, government has a revenue stream coming from it. It wants it to succeed. This cannabis industry, which has really been growing, I'd say, I mean, it's always existed, right? I don't have to go back to, how long, cannabis has been in the United States, but it's basically a post-World War II phenomenon. Um, kind of shifted over from imports from Latin America, grown in Mexico, et cetera, coming across the border in the United States, to now we're actually in a condition where U.S. farmland produces most of the product. It's actually mostly grown inside the lower 48 is the shocking thing, is how this industry has developed. So I think we've actually got a surplus based on what I've read about this, just from California, Washington State. Like this is probably just not even on the radar of most Americans yet. U.S. cannabis has basically become, a domestic market at this point.
Right.
Everything you're seeing with Venezuelan speedboats blown up in the Caribbean, et cetera, that's really for the cocaine trade, is what that one is focused on, and that cash flow route. This domestic, or at least the marijuana and hemp kind of cannabis industry, this is all just purely a lower 48 issue, which means it's inside the recognized sovereign boundaries of the U.S. government. And the process that we're going through is basically, in my opinion on this, you start with, over my lifetime, we all attended DARE, Reagan era drug abuse resistance education, curriculum in the U.S. trying to say just say no, right? That didn't work. So now you've got this kind of white market that's tried to be, that's trying to um, take over the black market, which is really the untaxed, underground, um, kind of organized crime run, kind of business operation of this marketplace. And so you've got an interesting split going on here. Size of the black market relative to the white market, it's roughly 2 to 1 still. But the white market really didn't even start to develop until that, 2010s wave. I think it was the 2012 election when Colorado and Washington became the first states to um, kind of green light cannabis production and distribution through taxed and regulated dispensaries. And that included like a full kind of supply chain look through in terms of the vertical production of the goods. Um, that's a trend that's been underway. It's only like 13 years in process. But as we're going through this situation with public deficits, debt, et cetera, it's a monetary situation. It's a monetary phenomenon at the end of the day. What's happening is the 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 recognized authority, the states that constitute the federal government and the federal government itself are in the process of enveloping and incorporating this little, it's not even a little market anymore. I'll get
Okay.
into the size of it. Yeah. Um, this industry um, into their purview, basically, into their complex. So this thing that Rand Paul is fighting for was actually you call it a gray market, right? It's outside of the what's going on at the state level with these, licensed dispensaries. Like this is like just going out and buying marijuana or CBD products, et cetera, at these shops that have popped up, across the country. I think about half the states have legalized cannabis at this point. That's the white market. The black market is your underground drug trade, everything classic. You see it in every movie, well documented, all of that. And there's this gray market in between that showed up with the 2018 Farm Bill um, that allowed for um, kind of like production of THC containing products, but they were derived from hemp, not the cannabis plants or the marijuana plants themselves. And that thing just got completely axed with this HR 5371, this continuing resolution that ended the government shutdown. So you think about all senators, lobbyists, and at the end of the day, they're funded by industry. And so I haven't looked through Rand Paul's record, like who is financing his campaign, reelection committees, all that, the super PACs. But you kind of have a sense of what someone stands up for by, how they act in terms of legislation. So there's definitely some incentives here, is what I would expect if we really pulled into the scenes, or pulled up the hood and looked at, who is the industry lobby for this little niche segment. Um, but yeah, that's underlying this. That's Rand Paul's hill he's going to die on here. Now, why is this such an important market? I mean, in terms of size, this isn't like Google search advertising or something like that, but it's a meaningful market. If you compare it, so tobacco products, roughly 110 billion, 108.5 billion dollar annual consumption that Americans spend on tobacco containing products. This is cigarettes, nicotine pouches, smokeless tobacco, all of that stuff. The cannabis market is on par with that, 100 billion to 148 billion, right? It may even be bigger. And right now, you've basically got the sovereign entity only has control of roughly a third of it, or has, yeah, it's a control. Like they're a part of roughly a third of it. Everything else is operating outside of the sovereign jurisdiction. Like even if it's within its own sovereign territories. So that's the process. The government has kind of gone through. All right, done fighting it. Now we're going to go incorporate it. And you think about the tobacco industry, similar times, milestones. It's an industry centuries old, right? But a big development in the U.S. tobacco industry was the settlement with the states. I think it was in the year 2000 or 2001 era, where you got from the states at the state level, you had a bunch of attorney generals enter into a settlement with the tobacco industry, and basically they came into a process where um, the tobacco companies are going to pay the states a certain amount of revenues based on market share of the producers on an annual basis. This thing is that same situation once you got regulatory capture of the tobacco industry. We're working towards that same process with the cannabis industry as in the big picture what's going on. It's just one interesting thread um, amongst all of the just the crazy volatility and turmoil that we're living through in this era. But yeah, it's $100 million annual prize, and people are going to fight over it.
Absolutely. I think that's something that you kind of have to dig into. That you have to see the votes, right, and then take that next step to then say, okay, well, why did they all vote this way? And I think so much of the focus over the last couple of days has been purely on the Democratic Party for good reasons, right? But I thought it was interesting that you also identified not just Rand Paul, but those other two Republican senators as well, saying, hey, there's some interesting tidbits here if you could dive into those.
Murkowski and Susan Collins. I
Collins, yeah.
I don't know specifics. I just know Lisa Murkowski. Her father was a either senator and governor in Alaska. You inherit kind of a political dynasty, similar to what we just saw in New York. We saw the end of one. Andrew Cuomo fails to win the election versus Mamdani. Not doesn't have much popularity left inside of that city and state. His father was also, I want to say, governor. Was a famous political figure. It's kind of that same process. These are people with a lot of influence. They control the political keys. Lisa Murkowski is kind of that same thing in Alaska. Um, I don't know any more specific, business interactions much beyond that. I know, Alaska tends to be a heavy oil and gas state. Not that much else going on up there. But it's kind of one of those things as you control the the keys of power. And right now, despite being pretty unpopular. She's still holding on. Susan Collins, not deeply, and I'm not as familiar with her situation in Maine, but she's one of those kind of toss-up votes. She's always been on the fence. Remember we talked about the Republican Party went through this transition, like it really completed it in 2016. It's like the laws of thermodynamics. Heat always flows from hot to cold. Kind of the same thing. If you think about the Republican Party, it went through that transition from the old guard. Candidates like John McCain, George W. Bush, Mitt Romney. Those are all gone. Like we're not going back to that era. The candidates now are Donald Trump, JD Vance, etc. Like they like
It's a different
we've
style,
crossed the
different type.
Rubicon.
Yeah.
It's not even different style, it's different power bases, like completely
Yeah.
different. Like they represent a different faction of capital and power. Um, so I would view like Susan Collins is always in the fence. She's interacting with the legacy Democrats very often, the one we talked about who had just had their, keys from the car taken away. She's always been on that line as well. So that's what I would chalk up there. But even she coalitioned with the Republicans and got them the 60 votes they needed to move this whole process forward, right? So, basically, um, the salt in the tank, preventing the car from moving, is like that step was not taken. But yeah, eventually, I mean, the senators come down to state level popularity. It's a state by state discussion. So the individual politics for that specific state, I'm not an expert on Maine politics by any means, but I just know how she interacts with the transitions we've seen across the parties underway since the mid 2010s, which is really responding. The event that kickstarted it was actually 2008. It's a monetary phenomenon at the end of the day we're going through, and 2008 was the starting gun that got this race going.